West Hill United is a progressive spiritual community where how you live is more important than what you believe. West Hill United is a people, a place, an idea. We are a community living out of a progressive faith, striving to make a positive difference in our own lives, the lives of others, and the world. Join us Sundays at 10:30 a.m. or connect with us at any time.
To see two things that don't appear to be related in the world and put them together, he was so used to doing that with his dyslexia, he began to do it in his work. He still has difficulty with simple tasks, but he prizes his, what they call it, superpower, that he's used it for good. And so Don's going to read a quote from Bryant that shows us how dignity was central in his life and his work. Don?
It is because of our interconnectedness that we all know that extreme poverty and exclusionary practices are violations against the basic dignity of people.
I love that he connected it with interconnectedness. Because we're all connected, then the basic dignity of people is our responsibility. The next person on the screen is José Saramago, a Portuguese writer who died in 2010, Nobel Prize winner. He writes, with imagination and compassion for people, he addresses serious matters with an empathy for the human condition and for the isolation that happens particularly in cities. If you live in a big city, you're aware of that. His characters in his books struggle to connect with someone, with something, and form relations and be in community, and to find meaning and dignity in those connections. Meaning and dignity in those connections. It's very surprising that he's been censored in Portugal by political parties and by the Roman Catholic Church for critiquing authoritarian dictatorships, which I always thought was a very good thing to critique. But he was censored for these ideas, but he kept working for that, with that compassion for all people. Don, his quote.
Dignity has no price. When someone starts making small concessions, in the end, life loses all meaning.
Eleanor Roosevelt. I wish I had known Eleanor Roosevelt. We could have Eleanor's picture up there. She's there? There she is. I chose that one because she's busy working. If you don't know Eleanor Roosevelt, just give you a little bit. She was the first lady in the United States, which means she's the spouse of a president whose name was Roosevelt. She was controversial, the first controversial first lady for her outspokenness on civil rights for African Americans. She was the first presidential spouse who decided she was going to hold press conferences, write a daily newspaper column, write a monthly magazine column, host a weekly radio show, and speak at national party conventions. First lady to do that, to speak out. And on a few occasions, and I love this she publicly disagreed with her husband's policies. I thought that's why she was called controversial. But to speak against the president, I suppose maybe she thought she had a little in there, but that could even be difficult. But she saw differently than him, and she spoke it. She saw differently than him, and she spoke it. She launched a community for unemployed minors, miners, minors, and it failed. And I love that they put that there because you can imagine her discouragement when it failed, but then she went on to another project. If that doesn't work, maybe this will work. She worked to expand the roles of women in workplaces, the civil rights of African Americans and Asian Americans, and the rights of World War II refugees. When her husband died, she did not think her job was over, and she kept working. She became the first delegate from the United States of America to the United Nations. She was their first delegate from America, and she spoke there about the status of women. She was given a standing ovation at the United Nations meeting that was the meeting where they adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and they stood for Eleanor Roosevelt. The next president, Harry Truman, called her the First Lady of the World. not just of the First Lady of the world, in a tribute to her human rights achievements for the dignity of all. And her quote, Don, is,
"Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places, close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any maps of the world? Such are the places where every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere."
oh, that was so powerful. Unless you can see justice where you live, in your world, it doesn't seem to matter that someone's doing something well on the other side of the world. That's good, but it needs to be where you live. So that was Eleanor Roosevelt. Loved her. Would have loved to have met her. I'm too young. I don't say that as much anymore. I'm too young for something, but I'm too young for that one. Next speaker, Baltasar Gracian. He died in 1658, so none of us had any chance to meet him. He was a prose writer and a philosopher, and his masterpiece was called El Critico, the Critic. And it's a story of a critic who got marooned on an island on which there was a very positive man who was also ruined there. And they tried to escape. They got off the island and they made travels together. And the whole book talks about the critic and the positive and the critic, and they worked together. They went on long adventures, suffered many disappointments, traveled to France, and in this book, the author calls France the wasteland of Hippocrinda, because it was populated entirely by hypocrites and dunces. So that was his story. That's what he thought of France at the time. And these two people, the critic and the positive one, encountered many difficulties, and they ended up in Rome, and they met people that were creative and inventive, and they thought, being in the company of creative, inventive people, they had achieved immortality. And that's the story that he wrote. One of his, Gracian's famous quotes you may have heard was, "Respect yourself if you would have others respect you," which I like, but I don't think it should depend on what others are doing to you, whether you respect yourself. So I would have disagreed slightly with them and had a good conversation. So Don, the quote from 1650s.
"What should move us to action is human dignity, the inalienable dignity of the oppressed, but also the dignity of each of us. We lose dignity if we tolerate the intolerable."
To tolerate the intolerable is an assault against dignity. Like, that's a powerful, powerful phrase. The last quote I wanted to bring you is by Kailash Satyarthi. Kailash Satyarthi. He died, he's still alive, he was born in 54. And he is a social reformer from India. It lives in India, who campaigned on many issues, but primarily on child labor. Child labor. You may have bumped into some of his work and not known that it was coming from him. He advocated for the universal right for every child to have an education. And because of his work, it has actually been policy that every child in India would have an education. And he founded 3 organizations. I just want to take you into each one of them for a moment. They're so powerfully important. The first one is called Bakpan Bakawe Andolan, and he founded it as a mass movement to create a child-friendly society where all children are free from exclusion and exploitation and receive free education. And this movement educates children who have been in servitude through direct intervention, through community participation, through coalitions and partnerships, promoting ethics in trade, unionizing workers, running campaigns on education, child trafficking, forced labor, and promoting ethical trade by building child-friendly villages to connect the problem of child labor with our ways of doing economics and what we think should help with that and get a profit. It was brilliant, brilliant. He saw that the child's dignity was being so harmed and so ignored that he worked at. He also established Good Weave International, Good Weave International, a network of nonprofit organizations dedicated to ending illegal child labor in the rug making industry. In the rug making industry. He provided the first requirement for companies to voluntarily label and monitor and certify the systems of rugs and how they were being manufactured by whom without the use of child labor in South Asia. It should never cease to shake us inside that that would even be necessary, that people would look at children as a source for their own economic profit. And he tried to raise awareness of the need to change our economic ways. The next organization he launched, I wish there was a movie of it. There's many movies of this man talking, but I wanted to see this one because he launched something called Bharat Yatra to spread awareness about child trafficking and sexual abuse of children. And he organized a march through 7 routes in India, covering 22 Indian states and union territories, over 12,000 kilometers, to start people talking about children, to protect them within their homes and their communities and their schools. Now, just to see how busy this fellow was, he collaborated with 5,000 civil societies, 60 Indian faith leaders, 500 Indian political leaders, 600 local, state, and national bodies of the Indian government, 300 members of the Indian Supreme Court, and 25,000 educational institutions across India. I can't even take in those numbers, let alone see someone putting that much, driven by the dignity of the child. The dignity of the child. More than, you want to know how many people marched in his march? More than 1,200,000 people joined him in a march for children. It lasted 35 days. I think they did rather well. And it ended with the anti-human trafficking bill being passed in India. I wanted to say to him, in this abundant blessing, we share the joy in that, but also the angst of why was it even necessary? Why was it needed? And so the last quote for Don to read is by this man who walked and worked long and hard for children. Don? Don, we will hear you much louder if you unmute. Much more loudly. Sorry, grammar.
Today, it is time for every child to have a right to life, right to freedom, right to health, right to education, safety, the right to dignity, right to equality, and the right to peace.
Thank you, Don, for reading the way you read these. I think they honored the depth of wisdom in the quote, so thank you very much, Don. Those 5 people and so many others, we were talking about this last time, they have this lens, they have these eyeglasses, these cataract operations or whatever it needed to see dignity wherever they looked, and to see where it was not being honored or acknowledged, and to celebrate where it was. We have in this community, online and in the room, have often, and Don started with it this morning, talked about the Commission for Human Rights of Indigenous People at the United Nations level. And it's the same thing, to see Indigenous people through the lens, through the view, through the interpretation of the dignity of all people. And the way that is protected is what we call human rights. Human rights are there, grounded on an assumption of people's dignity. If we didn't have that assumption, it wouldn't matter how we treated anybody. There'd be no need for human rights. Just do what you want, treat people like you want, make a profit, make whatever do, and just free for all. But that's not what the human community that joined together to be the United Nations decided that they would declare. They'd make a declaration that every single person on the planet, and we could expand that at West Hill to every bit of life on the planet, has dignity, and therefore we protect them with rights. And I do, when I've taught this at my workplace in long-term care, it's so important to stress that you look out at nature, you look out at the world, there's no rights out there. There's not even any morality out there, there's just life. It's the human community that evolves to where they say, hey, it matters. It matters how we treat one another. It goes better when we treat each other with dignity and respect and compassion and integrity than it does when we use people as existing only for our own good and only for our own interest and for our own profit. It's a very completely different way of thinking. And so to ground rights on dignity is fundamental. But it takes effort and constant reminding of ourselves to keep seeing people through the eyes of dignity. I think last time we talked about Viktor Frankl, who was a philosopher who ended up in prisoner of war camp. And one of his strongest statements is that a human being, so let's say, so you, Elaine, I'm going to use you for Elaine, you should never be seen by me as just a means to my end, whatever I want you for. The declaration says, I must see you as a person of dignity in your own right if you never do a thing for me at all. Even if you actually disagree with me, which I'm sure you never would, Elaine. But no, we've had lovely disagreements. It's always richer for it. Different viewpoints coming out and shared as well. But the idea of seeing another person not for me, but for themselves. And when I do this teaching at work, I run an all the time of people that have grown up without that sense of their own dignity because something didn't go right in their upbringing. So that idea of I will see you through the lens of dignity, no matter what you do or don't do for me. It's not conditional. I'm not putting a condition on your dignity. I'm choosing to see it there no matter what. The movie Avatar, if you saw that, where the blue people, Sigourney Weaver, great movie, they greeted each other with the greeting, I see you. I see you. What a beautiful thing. So I see you as an individual with dignity of your own. So that idea of it, we have to keep choosing it and keep choosing it and keep choosing it. I did an in-service not long ago at the Residents' Council organization of Ontario put together a slideshow about elder abuse and invited all the residents in the homes across Ontario to watch the presentation, because I want that idea to be lifted up, because abuse denies dignity. Abuse overrides my view of you as a person for your own sake and says I can treat you any way I like. So the idea of dignity, protected by rights, every person who lives in long-term care has the right to be protected from abuse. Has anyone in long-term care been abused in Ontario? Anyone? Have they ever not been treated with? Yes, yes, many incidents of abuse in hospitals, in long-term care, in all sorts of places, because someone was either too busy or too congested inside or didn't have a sense of what dignity is, and they treated someone without that dignity. And it doesn't mean the resident doesn't have dignity. It doesn't mean we took away their dignity. We just didn't treat them with it. They still had it. And I wanted to just raise a few thoughts with you where it's really hard to hold on to your own dignity. And it's really hard sometimes to hold on to someone else's, because they're either doing horrific things or they're just bugging you, and all of a sudden you see them more as a problem than a person. But to some of the places that it's really hard to keep in dignity, and one of them is a tough one, to have dignity in disability. We so stress that the right kind of person is strong and able and can walk and can fly, can be athletic and productive and all this sort. So when someone loses that, and people have worked hard to heal this, but they're somehow seen as lesser people. We don't have to pay as much attention to them. We don't have to. They're not the same anymore. They're not like us anymore. So to see someone who is disabled in any kind of way, and there are so many ways, to still see them as a person of dignity sometimes takes a reminder on our part or others' parts that the eyes that are looking at them will look at them with a complete acknowledgement of their dignity as a human being, all on their own. They don't have to perform, they don't have to act, they don't have to speak, they don't have to do anything but be alive and be a human being, and we see them with dignity. When it's broken, when trust is broken and people are treated abusively, it does a lot of harm. Statistically, and it depends where you read this. Of course, you know the kinds of abuse. There's physical abuse, there's emotional abuse, there's sexual abuse. I can never raise my fourth finger on its own. There's emotional or psychosocial abuse and financial abuse. And as I was talking to they all had examples of different ones, particularly right now the phone scams, where they'll phone an older person and pretend to be their child or something and ask for money, and so that's an abuse of the dignity. Statistically now, I think, I could be wrong, and please someone correct me, but I think it's 1 in 4 women before they reach 65 have had an not okay sexual experience with somebody. Where their dignity was either compromised or something more violent, and that's where dignity, and so how can someone who's experienced that keep seeing themselves as a person of dignity when they weren't treated like that? And that's the call for all of us, is to keep aware that people's experiences can affect them so badly, but it doesn't take away the fact that we want them to know that at least we see them as a person of dignity. So dignity and disability, dignity and death is a huge topic. Most people don't think about it. I work in a world where we think about it a lot. But dignity in death, but also dignity in dying, which is a whole different stretch of the journey. And we're knowing people that are in those stretches. And if we think people should look healthy and be strong, and the only kind of worthy people are the ones that are productive and functional, as your disability progresses and as your disease progresses, it's hugely important to keep looking at that person through the lens of dignity, but also to help them. And you've probably been in a hospital. If you've been in a hospital and they pulled the sheet off you before you were supposed to go down for the operation, or they asked you questions in front of everybody else and you didn't want to do that, it's not a great place to hold your dignity together. In some things in hospitals, long-term care, to help someone hold on, to help me hold on to my sense of dignity as a human being, despite the situation I'm in at the time, when my hands are shaking, or I can't say the words anymore, or I can't function with my body, I need help. When I need help, I also need a reminder of my dignity. When I need help doing basic things to remind myself that I'm a person of me. So it's not only seeing others through the lens of dignity, it's seeing ourselves through that lens, even if things are happening in our body or our mind, to hold that beautiful truth. So I see you with eyes of dignity, and I see me with eyes of dignity, but I'm going to ask you to help me. I'm going to ask you to be one of the people that reminds us of that. So an unearned, unconditional assumption, a declaration of the dignity of all, takes work, takes patience, takes reminders, but it makes such a difference. And you've probably, I know you all, you've been in people's lives and you've brought that respect and care even when they're floundering or they're not well or they're difficult. And then lastly, as someone is heading towards death, to keep the idea of the dignity of who they are, no matter what. It's like a call that needs our salute and our pledge for all, that we will see people that way. So an unearned, unconditional regard, and in social work they call that unconditional positive regard. No matter what the client says, you must approach it with unconditional positive regard, which doesn't mean that we aren't allowed to disagree with their life choices, disagree with what they've said, disagree with what they've done. I just did a mediation between two people who could not see a bridge that they could make to each other, and we painstakingly we constructed a little thread, and then we tried to build on the little thread and get a little bit more strong of construction equipment to build that to where they could see each other as human beings of dignity and of worth. But if we don't hold up those values, they don't come automatically. They just don't. In fact, if you don't hold on to them, undignified behavior rushes in. So, I'm going to ask. Thank you, Babette. I wish I could take you into me when I'm playing something, and Babette, and often Donna, but Babette today sings it and lifts the words into our hearts. It's just such a privilege, such a special, fragile, strong, beautiful experience. So thank you, Babette, thank you, Don, for the way you have read, and Babette for the way you have sung. It means a great deal. I hope that the idea of dignity, unconditional, unearned dignity, becomes more and more a way we look. It's more and more our lens, our perspective, how we look out, and where we can make a difference to remind someone, to treat someone with a little more dignity when they might be floundering, and to treat ourselves with more dignity and more acknowledgement of our own worth, that it doesn't have to be earned. Earned can earn us respect from people, but that unconditional idea of the worth and dignity of a human being is something the human community has decided to declare at a United Nations level. When they declared the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they invited the countries of the world to sign on. Now, I'll take just a little moment. The indigenous rights, the statement of indigenous rights that the UN asked people to sign on to, was affirmed by many, many countries, excepting 4 who voted no, and we were one of them. We were one of them. Canada, United States, and I think Australia. However, we've learned more and we've signed them on, which is very good. But it reminded me that there's controversy on just about any kind of issue, but we're in there now. So when the United Nations declared the universal human rights, they invited the countries of the world to sign on. And many, many did. Many, many did. Canada did. United States did. UK did. I'm thinking of the people in many countries in Africa did. But many didn't and still haven't, because they do not want to say this is how we want to treat all our citizens, all our people with dignity. So there's work to be done across the globe and in our own lives, but if you can walk out of here with a shored up, clear, beautiful sense of your own worth and dignity, then that's a very good time we have spent together for that. I'm going to ask Babette to just lead us in our song, and after that song, you can wander, you can munch. If you're on the screen, you have brought your own refreshments, and you can enjoy them. You can pass them around the screen if you like, and we will have our time here. And thank you for everyone that puts that together. Just in the room, could I see the people that put our refreshments together today? Could you just signal with your hand up? You don't want to see Anna Marie and the refreshments. Who helped with the refreshments? Just Anne Marie. Oh, and Barb, there you are. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for that. If anyone wants to go on the screen and say, in the camera here, you can say hello to all the people on Zoom. Come up, tell them what you ate, and feel badly that they didn't have any. Something like that. Anyway, go and have a good and rich and dignified week. We'll just have our sending song now, and see you again.
And a special thank you to you, Scott, for taking the service today and for all the work that we've done in putting it together for us. So hands waving, hands clapping, thank you for making a Sunday together even extra special. This is the final song of our time together today, so if you'd like.
Become a sustaining champion of West Hill United's work by committing to an automatic monthly donation. Learn more or donate now through Canada Helps.